Well, thank you very much, Vince. We've now got just over half an hour or so for questions. And while you're just thinking about the questions that you'll put, I'm going to take Chair's advantage and put one myself, Vince. On the 5th of October, a group of industrialists, very significant industrialists, employing between them 17,500 people in the UK, wrote to Ed Davey, and they said that they saw potential for significant further investment to support the UK's move to a low-carbon power generation if the government's able to ensure high levels of confidence. But they said recent delays and reported disagreements in government have caused us to reassess the level of political risk in the UK. Are they right to be worried, Vince?
No, I don't think you should be worried, but there is an issue. I don't deny that. There have been some quite fierce arguments within the coalition over this issue, basically about how much weight we attach to renewable energy, as opposed to the short-term advantages of using more gas. And actually, the two things are not inconsistent if they're properly managed, but there is an argument about where the emphasis should be. We do realise that it's important not to damage confidence. There are some absolutely key industries on that list, on that letter. People like Siemens, who are poised to make very large investments in Hull, and others, particularly in the ports around the East Coast. We want them. It's absolutely crucial. And we get the message that they need clear, consistent policy and a long-term commitment to their industry, and we intend to give that. And I know Ed Davey will be announcing in the next few weeks a framework which will hopefully answer their anxieties.
I mean, a lot of these companies are multinational companies, and they identified risk in the UK as being higher than presumably elsewhere. Are there lessons that we can learn from other countries to cut that risk?
Well, they are multinational companies. Probably we'll just say in passing, we actually have a more open approach to inward investment than most other countries. We take the view that providing they invest here and create good jobs here, we're not going to discriminate against them because they're foreign owned. So, you know, we do have an open door approach to inward investment. And I wouldn't underestimate what's already been achieved. We have a more well-developed offshore wind sector, I think, than any other country in the world at the moment. The London Array is, I think, the biggest project in the world. There is already quite a big wind-based manufacturing sector which is growing in this country. So we've already done a lot, but we don't want to, at this crucial stage, frighten off these companies because they are crucial. And as I'll just repeat what I said a moment ago, we do acknowledge that they need stability, clarity, consistent regulation, and the government will deliver that very soon.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to the floor now. So I think, if possible, we'll take it in groups of 3, and it would be very helpful if you could say the organisation where you come from as well as your name. So Sue, first of all.
Thank you. My name's Sue Ferns, and I work for the trade union Prospect, and it's really a follow-up to the question that Francis asked about the need for long-term stability and certainty for investors, and therefore to ask, in terms of the upcoming energy bill, is it your expectation that there will be a carbon reduction target written onto the face of the bill, and if so, what kind of range do you expect that reduction to cover?
Thank you. I think Steve over here, please.
Thank you very much, Francis. It's Steve Elliott, Chair of the Energy Intensive User Group and CEO of the Chemical Industries Association. I'd just like, one's a comment and then a question, if that's okay. We'd like to thank you, Vince, and your department in particular, for enabling energy-intensive industries, and there are a number in the room today, to move out of that problem child corner in terms of the contribution they make to not only the UK economy and recovery and growth, but also low carbon and the greening of the economy. And I'd like to think in time that we stop this discussion about what's a green industry and what isn't. And that really would be success. When we met with yourself and Francis and the TUC in early summer, we talked a bit about looking at long-term strategy development for energy-intensive industries, and you were very receptive to that idea. I wonder if you could just say a bit more about where you see that going. Thank you.
Okay. And one more over here.
Laura Cohen, Chief Executive of the British Ceramic Confederation, and again we're a member of the Energy Intensive Users Group, so this follows on from Steve's question. We've got some particularly challenging targets around the fourth carbon budget, a 50% in emissions reduction. Part of that strategy, what can be done to help industries get breakthrough technologies and support demonstrator projects to ensure that the UK can continue to take a lead here, perhaps by recycling some of the green taxes that are being raised?
Thank you.
Well, on the first, certainly my colleague Ed Davies made it very clear he wants to see a decarbonisation target. That's actually one of the issues we're debating within the coalition as to whether that indeed should be at the centre of the strategy, and it hasn't yet been fully resolved. I think it's important to be clear that there is a genuine and difficult choice set here. If the emphasis is placed on renewable energy, then at least in the short run, you raise costs because they haven't yet got to a scale where they can be produced competitively with standard gas-based power stations. You're probably talking 10p per kilowatt hour versus 4p per kilowatt hour, whatever it happens to be, a big differential. And there are people, my colleagues in government, who would say, well, actually, given the problems we have in the economy, we're trying to keep costs down to industrial users and domestic users. Let's go for the cheapest route to keep domestic household bills and industrial bills under control. And the cheapest route probably involves using lots and lots of gas, at least in the current state of the energy economy. The alternative view is you've got to think long term, you've got to build in more decarbonisation. In the short run, that's costly, but in the long term, the more the volume, the more you drive down unit costs, and of course, the more you contribute to your climate change objectives. There's a real difficult trade-off, and it's not something where I think you can say people are necessarily right or wrong. My party within the coalition is giving greater weight to the decarbonisation objective, but I understand where my Conservative colleagues are coming from. On the second issue, which is Steve Elliott's question, we do understand the importance of chemicals, ceramics, paper, iron and steel, which are the industries that are potentially most effective. And I think the point I would make, which I'm sure you would make, is that although they are relatively energy intensive or electricity intensive, the two things are not quite the same, they're also industries which typically have made more progress than any other in increasing energy efficiency. But of course their electricity costs may nonetheless be a high proportion of their overall costs, but they are often exemplars of energy efficiency. And when I go to see Tata in South Wales, they will give me a long story about the phenomenal improvements that they've made in energy efficiency. We do want to acknowledge all of that. In terms of industrial strategy, we're very flexible about this. What I've basically said is that we want to sit down and talk to the key sectors of the economy, which we think will drive growth in the long run, particularly those which are tradable, which engage in international trade, and that's advanced manufacturers, areas like life sciences, creative industries, energy and construction, digital to some extent. But we've got to be flexible about this. We don't know where technology is going to go. A lot of industries don't particularly want to engage with government. They'd rather we just got out of their way. Others do want to have a close relationship, and we're pretty flexible and pragmatic about how we do it. So if the chemical industry does want to engage, and I believe they do, we're very happy to develop a strategy with them. And the model The best example is the Automotive Council. In a way, that's a kind of role model for the others, where we sit down on a regular basis with the leading car makers, some of their main suppliers, some of the kind of experts in that field, and we've mapped out a long-term strategy for the sector, looking at areas like new batteries, which the industry needs government help to support, looking at filling in the supply chains. And if we can have that kind of dialogue with the chemicals industry, or for that matter ceramics, we'd be absolutely delighted to do it. But in terms of technology, I think the main place we see as advancing technology which has industrial application is through these so-called catapults. I don't know which of them would be most directly applicable to the ceramics sector, but when I meet the ceramics industry, as I do from time to time, I'm sure you'll give me a steer on that.
Thank you. A question over here. Any more? Does anybody else want to put their hand up? There's one at the blue check shirt.
Hello there, Minister. My name's Syed Ahmed. I work for a research group called Energy for London. And one of the things I'm doing is looking at how we make homes in London and buildings in London more energy efficient, and how we alleviate issues around fuel poverty. Now, the government's flagship environmental programme in this area is the Green Deal. And your colleagues in DEC say that there'll be a significant increase in the numbers of people working under the Green Deal, up to perhaps 60,000, a tripling or even fourfold increase in the number of people working in the insulation sector over the next few years. The insulation industry is saying that their sector will be decimated. Can you help me? Who's right?
Well, the Green Deal is in the process of taking off. It's effectively lending people money to invest in domestic energy saving and getting a payoff over a period of time. The argument, as I'm sure you know, because you're in this business, is what is an appropriate rate of interest to charge on those loans that will be provided through the energy companies. What is now possible, which wasn't possible a week ago, is that the Green Investment Bank can work with the Green Deal to get this off the ground and operating on a large scale. The other key precondition, apart from having a good financial arrangement, is having trained people, and I think that's what you were hinting at, wasn't it? And the programme I mentioned of using these sustainable energy academies is seen as absolutely central to getting the right skills in place.
Okay, there was one over there.
Steve Burak. I want to be positive because I believe being positive is the only answer, because otherwise it creates division. Picking up on that, on your issue, Vince, of long-term versus short-term, I'm sure you are aware, as we all are, that the problem there is that a 5-year government is short-term. And so there has to be a continuity somehow between one government and the next. So this is an argument really about how you create a continuity of unity. And so I'm going to suggest that somehow methods need to be employed where one government party actually works, say, with the opposition and the other parties. There has to be more unity, and beyond the national situation, there has to be this continuity of unity beyond the country we're in, beyond the nation, with other nations. So it's a plea against division and all parties and nations actually working together, which would actually create quite a different paradigm. But I think we do need a new paradigm to address this terrible issue of climate change, which could become very, very serious, of course.
Thank you. We've got a couple of others here. Yeah.
Clara Paylard from the PCS Union in National Museums, Liverpool. I'm a green rep in my workplace, and as many of us here, we work with the employers to reduce CO2 emission in the workplace, reduce energy consumption, improve recycling, and we do a lot of work with our employers. At the moment, the government is planning to cut facility time for union reps in general, but green reps, we already get very little facility time. So I was just wondering how you can address that and hopefully, get time for green reps to be efficient in the workplace.
And there was one, oh yes, sorry, in the tie.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Hammond. I'm a researcher in skills. Dr. Cable, if I wanted to work on your gas boiler, I'd have to be registered with GasSafe. If I wanted to put a solar panel on your roof or a pump in your house or a photovoltaic panel in your house, I could go out of that door today and I could do it. Surely the time has come to put environmental technologies on the same footing as GasSafe and bring in some legislation so that you actually do get skilled workers and not cowboys.
Okay, on the short term, long term, I mean, I will refrain from trying to get into a party political thing about who's more long term and who's more short term. I take your basic point that if these things are going to survive, they've got to go beyond one government. All governments, by definition, in the UK are fairly short term because we've only got 5 years. And the kind of problems we're talking about are over a generation. And climate change is one of those issues like pensions, which unless you can get agreement between political parties never goes anywhere because, you know, the next lot rip up what you've done. And a lot of the things I've been talking about, I would hope, and I think that the current official opposition would be enthusiastic about if they were in government. I think the feedback I get is that they quite like what we're doing on the industrial strategy, Green Investment Bank, the new business bank. You know, there are some criticisms, but I think they broadly like them and will continue them. And it is obviously crucial in the area we're dealing with, energy policy and climate change, that we have that kind of buy-in. I mean, the basic legislation we operate under is the climate change legislation, which the current leader of the Labour Party brought in. We accept that's the framework, the legal framework within which we operate. So I think, you know, we can have a barney about who's good and who's bad, but actually the basic point is fully understood and accepted. The last 2 points, the last 2 questions, I'm not able to give a totally satisfactory reply to. I don't quite know the answer. I wasn't aware that there was proposals to reduce facility time, but maybe Francis or somebody else can put me right on that. I should know, but I wasn't aware of it. And secondly, on the definition of skills, I mean, this is something that is developed through UK CES, which the trade union movement is properly represented on through the various sector working parties, and that would be the place to consolidate definitions of skills that are to provide proper accreditation for the kind of new world we're getting into.
I mean, there have been a number of announcements on union facilities time, in other words, trade union reps who represent their members and try and negotiate fair working conditions, but also, of course, our green reps who are trying to work with management to reduce energy use and get workforce involvement, that facilities time would be cut. Francis Maud has been leading a drive in central government. Eric Pickles has announced a drive from the fringe of Conservative Party conference in local government. Your department, Vince, produced plenty of evidence showing the value that union reps bring to good, mature industrial relations at work. So it would be very welcome at this conference if you want to announce a rethink.
Well, all I can say is that if there had to be legislation, I would have to introduce it, and we don't have any plans to do it.
No, there doesn't have to be legislation, but there has to be political opposition to what trade unions see as an attack on what we would like to happen, which is a real partnership for greener workplaces. Okay, let's take a few more. One over there, and behind you, and then over here, community.
Secretary of State, Dwight Demore from the Mineral Products Association representing the cement industry. You said that you're very keen to do as much as you can to support energy-intensive industries like my own, and I also hear a lot about getting rid of gold plating of European regulations and interpretation of European regulations. But there is actually an important point in this. There is an exemption against energy taxes called the mineralogical transformation exemption, which is applied in Germany, it's applied in France, it's applied in Spain, it's not applied here in the UK. We took this up with Mark Prisk, who very enthusiastically supported our case with Treasury, but it's come back to us through the Green Economy Council that while Treasury is minded to support it also, officials are far too busy to look at it until 2014. Industry has to be fleet of foot to compete. Can government keep up with us?
Thank you. Fergus McReynolds from EEF, the Manufacturers Organisation. A question regarding the sort of complexity of regulation in the UK. Manufacturers, as of next year, could be subject to up to 4 carbon reporting schemes in the face of climate change agreements, the CRC, EU ETS, and the recently announced greenhouse gas reporting. Does the Secretary of State feel that there's an issue there that needs to be addressed in terms of the overlapping complexity of those policies?
Hi, Ken Penton. I'm an NUJ member. I'm also a political consultant, and one of my clients is SSI, the Thai steel company, which the Secretary of State knows well because he visited them recently. I think, as the gentleman from the Energy Intensive Users Group said, and you acknowledge there's work that has been done, but still more can be done on decarbonisation and energy efficiency. But in terms of climate change, it's important that government policy is based on fact and evidence. Now, the UK carbon budget, a recent UK carbon budget said that, as one of its areas applied to looking at the steel industry, that we envisage after 2020 coking coal, which you need in the production process of making steel, can be replaced by alternative products. This should reduce CO2 emissions. When I challenged the ex-Secretary of State's ex-Special Advisor about how they come to this decision and what evidence it was based upon, he said, well, we haven't quite got our head around that one yet. So, my question is, how can you produce policy? I know it's not your department, but we're talking about joined up government and the department that's responsible for supporting British industry. The part of a policy base has got absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
Right. On the cement, I'm well aware that there are serious problems in the cement industry and low levels of capacity utilisation, largely because of the low level of activity in construction, which has been there since 2009. So I realise the cement industry has got problems. I'm not familiar totally with the details of those conversations you've had with my colleagues. If you can let me have the details, I'll try and follow it up. We did actually send a group of people to Germany to have a look at how they deal with the extra costs that result from tax and other measures at European and national level as they affect industries like yours. And I'm sure that was taken into account, but let me have the details if you can. There's a particular issue with cement, as you know, that of course it is very energy intensive, but it's also not as extensively traded as, say, steel or chemicals. And so under the European Union's rules allowing compensation, it's more difficult to make the case for cement, but we are aware of its difficulties. In terms of the Engineering Employers Federation, I know because I talked to Mr. Schooler and others, the concerns that you have about reporting requirements. I mean, I am trying to strip away a lot of the excess verbiage that companies are required to produce, but, there are certain basic requirements. And if we take the climate change agenda seriously, then obviously there has to be some monitoring. But we are working with you to try and get rid of the excess. On SSI, I'm aware, I know the history and the current issues around it. Like the rest of the steel industry, it's in the middle of a serious slump, global demand. They're coping very well with it, but it is extremely difficult conditions. I think your problem was over perhaps ill-considered comments about alternative materials. Is that right? I mean, clearly technology is moving on. I mean, there are alternative materials being derived the whole time, but I don't think that by 2020 anybody significantly there's any belief that the demands for steel will change fundamentally. We'll set the next batch.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to take one final batch. I've got a speaker here, or we've got lots of hands going up now.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Just do one batch.
The woman in a green jacket over there, and I'll take a couple more.
Thank you. Emma Howard-Boyd from Jupiter Asset Management, where I have responsibility for governance and stewardship, as well as looking at climate change issues. So I've been engaging with your department on things as varied as executive pay, gender diversity, etc. I think you're initiating the K review has been very useful for my industry to start focusing on the long term, and that is a place where we can actually start thinking about climate change risks within our investments. So I'm interested as to when you will say more about things like fiduciary duty, because again, I think that is very important for members of this conference to think about other ways of tackling issues around climate change. Thank you.
I think from a trade union perspective, we'd be interested in whether you think shareholder supremacy is good enough stewardship on this agenda too.
Sue Riddlestone, Chief Executive at Bioregional. We're a social enterprise working to implement sustainable communities and products and services. And my question is, with the SME sector, cooperatives, community organisations can be much more innovative than large companies and are often struggling to seek funding. Raising funding is difficult in these risky areas as we sort of pioneer and push forward the boundaries to create the green economy. So I just wondered if you could say a little about how SMEs or cooperatives or community groups could perhaps seek investment through the Green Investment Bank or any other opportunities or ways forward there.
Okay, a couple more, hopefully on different issues. The guy in the blue over here, please. And to make it easy, the guy behind him.
Yeah, my issue's on fracking. This government now is trying to push this fracking through. Yeah. With the last survey from America that was taken, 80% of the total, what was actually surveyed, had actually ended up with illnesses, throat and sinus problems. Now, why are the government still trying to push this through? Yeah, when there's so many health risks to people, and also there's environmental risks as well with it.
Dr. Cable, Richard Clifton from the Vauxhall van plant in Luton and Unite Rep. You mentioned earlier about the motor industry and all the good things that are happening. One of the problems we've got, and I'm sure it's not just us within Luton, is the cost of energy. Is there anything that the government can do short term to help us with reducing our costs? Thank you.
I think we're looking for clarification on the government's position on energy prices there. Were you saying, Vince, you'd like to take one more from the woman here? I think you were.
Hello, Anne Schultes from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. There's a letter in the Independent today saying that the government is considering a U-turn that would mean that taxpayers are going to be liable for any project overruns on new nuclear construction. And this is in an effort to reassure investors in nuclear power. This flies in the face of the government claims that it doesn't subsidize the nuclear industry. Do you have anything to say about that?
Thank you. Some easy ones for you.
Yes, big issues will keep me here afternoon. On John Kay and long-termism, that was something I launched shortly after I got into this job, because it seemed to me that an awful lot of the decisions made in British business were very, very short-term takeovers, for example, that really didn't have any long-term justification. And John Kay has produced this report, which is now been subject to consultation. We're just waiting for people's feedback before we decide what to do about it. It does raise issues like the usefulness or not of quarterly reporting. That's something we can act on, but it is subject to European rules in that case. We can't just do it unilaterally. The other key area where he's trying to get some action is trying to squeeze out some of the well, what economists call rent in the whole chain of investment managers, right? The problem we have in the UK with financing is that you have savers who want to save for the long term, and at the other end of the pipeline, you've got industries that want to operate in the long term, and then in between, you've got all these intermediaries in various markets, in investment managers and so on, who have a short-term perspective because that's how their bonuses and their incentives are structured. And John Kay has some quite sophisticated ideas about how we tackle that. Most of it doesn't actually involve legislation, though there is the issue about fiduciary duty, which we're looking at. But there is an issue. I mean, one of the main things that's hit me between the eyes since I did this job is that Britain has a totally different culture from countries like Germany or South Korea or Japan and the other countries that are doing well, and it is often summed up by that long-term versus short-term approach to business. And we've got to get a much longer-term mindset, quite apart from the issues of climate change. In terms of SMEs, the Green Investment Bank probably won't be able to deal directly with thousands of SMEs, but we will be dealing with institutions that aggregate bids on behalf of them. The money that's already going out of the door on waste projects and industrial energy efficiency are basically managed funds which are operating at one removed from large numbers of SMEs. So we will be supporting SMEs, but it'll be happening indirectly. I think one of the big problems I didn't talk about today that in a way permeates this whole debate is the collapse of the banking system and the terrible damage that's been done and the consequences which we're still living with for the funding of small, medium-sized companies. Position of my assessment is actually the credit condition is deteriorating at the moment. It's not getting any better. We're trying all kinds of interventions, guarantees, for example, this new business bank that I'm in the process of establishing. But still, the environment for SMEs trying to raise both equity and loan finance is a difficult one. There are one or two particular areas where I think there's some really interesting progress taking place. One is so-called CDFIs, Community Development Finance Institutions. We've given them some money through the Regional Growth Fund, and they're also doing a lot of work with the Co-op Bank. And this is financing micro companies which simply can't get access to bank finance. We're wanting to expand that. Another is supply chain finance. There was a discussion today in the press about it. My department has set up a fairly small fund to try to help companies lower down the supply chain to ensure that the prime contractors do make credit available to their suppliers, many of which operate on very, very short cash horizons. And the good companies like Rolls-Royce already do that, but a lot of them don't. So we're trying to build up supply chain finance as an alternative to going through the banking system. On fracking, I think it just isn't true that we're wanting to push ahead with this, disregarding safety and environmental concerns. Those safety and environmental conditions will have to be met before any company is allowed to engage in fracking. That's absolutely clear. But, you know, I think this is one of those areas we shouldn't approach dogmatically. You know, various people have taken up sort of ideological positions that, you know, fracking's a great thing, it happens in America, it's the solution to all our problems, which is obviously nonsense. And then people on the other hand who've developed some kind of ideological hostility to this particular technology. And that isn't sensible either. It's something that we should think about in a practical way, and if the health and safety and environmental conditions are met, well, why not do it? I think the problem in the UK is not actually the problems you describe. The problem is that there probably isn't a great deal of gas that can be extracted using that technology. And I have talked to the oil companies, and they, you know, there probably is a bit, but not vast amounts. In terms of the Vauxhall Unite question, when we talk about the cost of energy, we've got to distinguish, obviously, between domestic users and industrial users. In terms of domestic users, I mean, you've seen the argument going on at the moment about, you know, how we get the energy companies, the big electricity suppliers and British Gas and the others to you know, give households the benefit of complex tariff regimes. The issue here goes back to what I said earlier. A lot of those companies are making big long-term investments and they claw it back from their customers. That's how they finance their investment. So, you know, we've got to balance those issues. The big killer, of course, has been petrol prices, and that's ultimately driven by what's happening in world oil markets. And we have tried to deal with that problem. I think several increases in the escalator have been postponed. Scarce public finance has been diverted to helping motorists in that way. That's a question about whether we should give that highest priority or not, but we have done because we realise that for motorists and domestic households, that's probably the most sensitive price. And then finally, about the C&D question about nuclear power, our basic approach is that we perfectly welcome nuclear power, but we're not subsidising it, and that remains the case. The problem with nuclear power is, what does a subsidy mean? Are we talking about operating costs? Are we talking about decommissioning? Are we talking about long-term waste disposal? I mean, in principle, certainly my side of the coalition takes the view that the industry should carry these costs, but some of them are very difficult to isolate. And we're currently in the middle of negotiating, certainly with EDF and potentially with others, initially about Hinkley Point and then others. And part of the negotiation is about who carries what costs. But the underlying principle is that we don't think nuclear power should be subsidised. It's not an infant industry like wind. It's a well-established industry. It should be able to operate commercially.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Vince, not only for your speech, but also for being prepared to take so many questions for such a period of time. I think people respect and appreciate that. I know that at party conference you declared yourself a pleb. We had tens of thousands of people marching on Saturday for an alternative, including a good green industrial strategy, and that march was led by young unemployed people. So we know how important it is to get a real, serious, ambitious industrial strategy going, and very much hope that you will press the cause of those young people on Saturday. That just really leaves me to thank all our workshop speakers and our chairs, to thank TUC staff who as ever put in a lot of work behind the scenes to organise events like these and make sure it runs smoothly for everybody, including Congress Centre staff, and especially perhaps a name check for Emma, who I understand went beyond the call of duty and really worked hard for today. And finally, just to thank everybody here from across all the different aspects of this great new alliance. I think we've had some excellent contributions, and I hope you've enjoyed the day. Thank you.